The fluorescent lights of the operating room cast harsh shadows across my surgical mask as I looked down at the small figure on the table. 7 years old, critical condition, brain hemorrhage. The chart in my hands read a name that made my blood run cold. Emma Richardson. Richardson. That surname had haunted my nightmares for 23 years. As I stood there, my hands trembling slightly despite 15 years of surgical experience, I couldn't help but think about the cruel irony of this moment. The daughter of the woman who had tried to destroy my childhood was now fighting for her life, and I was the only surgeon in a 100-mile radius qualified to save her. My name is Dr. Maya Johnson, and this is the story of how the girl who once called me worthless would soon have to trust me with the most precious thing in her world.
Welcome back to Heartland Confessions, where real stories reveal the extraordinary power of human resilience. I'm your host, and today's story comes from Dr. Maya Johnson, a pediatric neurosurgeon whose journey from victim to healer will challenge everything you think you know about forgiveness, justice, and the strange ways life comes full circle. This isn't just a story about bullying. This isn't just a story about success against the odds. This is a story about the moment when our past collides with our present, when we must choose between revenge and redemption, and when we discover that sometimes the most profound healing happens not in spite of our pain, but because of it. So settle in, because Maya's story will take you from the hallways of a small-town high school to the sterile corridors of one of America's most prestigious children's hospitals, and finally to a moment of truth that would test the very core of who she had become.
My story begins in Millfield, a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business, and secrets were currency more valuable than cash. It was 1995, and I was 14 years old, walking through the hallways of Millfield High like a ghost that everyone could see, but wished they couldn't. Being one of only 3 black students in a school of 800 wasn't just isolating. It was like living with a target painted on your back every single day. But if I'm being honest, the color of my skin wasn't the only thing that made me different. I was awkward, bookish, and wore secondhand clothes that my grandmother altered to fit me. My hair was always in simple braids because we couldn't afford the salon, and my shoes had been resoled so many times that even I could see the patches. But none of that compared to having Sarah Richardson as my personal tormentor. Sarah was everything I wasn't. Blonde, popular, wealthy, and seemingly blessed with the kind of effortless cruelty that could destroy a person's spirit with surgical precision. Her father owned the largest construction company in 3 counties, and her mother was president of the country club. In a town like Millfield, that made the Richardsons royalty, and Sarah wore her crown like she was born for it. The first time Sarah really noticed me was in sophomore biology class. Mr. Peterson had just handed back our tests on cellular respiration, and I had gotten the highest score in the class, again. As he announced the results, I felt that familiar mixture of pride and dread. Pride because I loved learning, dread because I knew what was coming. Well, well, Sarah's voice carried across the classroom like a poison dart. Looks like the scholarship girl is showing off again. The way she said, scholarship girl, made it sound like a disease. 28 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. I wanted to disappear, to melt into my plastic chair and never exist again. Maybe if you spent less time trying to prove you belong here, and more time knowing your place, people might actually like you. She continued, her voice sweet as honey and twice as deadly. Mr. Peterson should have stopped her. Any adult should have stopped her. Instead, he cleared his throat uncomfortably and moved on to the next lesson, leaving me to sit there with my A+ paper, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. That was just the beginning. Sarah had a gift for finding my weak spots and pressing them until they bled. She would accidentally bump into me in the hallways, sending my books flying while she laughed with her friends. She would make comments about my lunch, usually a peanut butter sandwich and an apple that my grandmother packed, wondering aloud how anyone could be satisfied with poor people food. But the worst part wasn't the public humiliation. The worst part was how she would smile at me afterward, like we were sharing some private joke that only she understood, like my pain was entertainment designed specifically for her amusement. "You know what I love about you, Maya," she said to me one day after a particularly brutal episode where she had questioned why I was in the advanced placement classes when there were more deserving students who should have those spots. "You actually think you matter. It's adorable." I went home that day and cried until my grandmother found me curled up on my bedroom floor, my homework scattered around me like fallen leaves. "Baby girl," she said, sitting down beside me and stroking my hair. "Some people try to make themselves feel big by making others feel small. But you remember this. Your worth isn't determined by what small-minded people think. It's determined by what you do with the gifts God gave you." My grandmother, Evelyn Johnson, was the strongest person I knew. She had raised me since I was 3 years old, after my parents died in a car accident. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and watching children during the day, just to keep food on our table and clothes on my back. She never complained, never made me feel like a burden, and never let me give up on my dreams, even when those dreams seemed impossible. "What if I'm not strong enough, Grandmama?" I whispered that night. "Strength isn't about not feeling pain, baby. Strength is about feeling that pain and choosing to keep going anyway. And you, Maya Johnson, are going to do great things in this world. I can feel it in my bones." But as my junior year continued, Sarah's campaign against me intensified. She had recruited a small army of followers who treated tormenting me like a sport. They would make monkey sounds when I walked by. They would leave banana peels in my locker. They would whisper just loud enough for me to hear them making jokes about affirmative action and how I was stealing spots from real Americans. The breaking point came on a cold February morning in 1997. I had just won the regional science fair with my project on neural regeneration, a topic that fascinated me because I dreamed of becoming a doctor someday. The local newspaper had even written a small article about it, calling me a bright young mind with a promising future. Sarah found me at my locker that Monday morning, holding a copy of the newspaper. "Look what we have here," she said, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "Little Maya thinks she's going to be a doctor." She laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. "Sweetie, people like you don't become doctors. People like you become maids and food service workers. You might as well accept it now and save yourself the disappointment." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 3 years of torment. Maybe it was the way she said "people like you" with such casual venom. Maybe it was because she was attacking the one dream that kept me going through all the darkness. "People like me?" I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "You mean people who actually earn their achievements instead of having them handed to them because of their last name?" The hallway went dead silent. Sarah's face flushed red, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes that might have been respect. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a rage so pure, it was almost beautiful in its intensity. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said quietly, stepping so close I could smell her expensive perfume. "You think because you win some stupid science fair that you're somebody? You're nothing. You will always be nothing. And I'm going to make sure everyone in this pathetic town knows it. What happened next would haunt me for years to come, but it would also forge me into the person I was meant to become." The war Sarah declared that February morning wasn't fought with weapons or fists. It was fought with something far more devastating: systematic, social destruction. Within a week, I found myself completely isolated. Students who had been neutral toward me suddenly wouldn't make eye contact. Teachers who had once encouraged me began treating me with cold indifference. Even the janitor, Mr. Williams, a kind black man who always smiled and asked about my grades, started avoiding me in the hallways. I couldn't understand what was happening until I overheard 2 girls talking in the bathroom. "I heard she tried to seduce Mr. Peterson for better grades," one whispered. "And that she's been stealing from other students' lockers," the other added. My mom says her grandmother is probably on welfare fraud too. Sarah's mom told her at book club. The rumors were everywhere, spreading like wildfire through our small town. Sarah had weaponized the very prejudices that already existed, giving people permission to believe the worst about me because it confirmed what some of them had always suspected about people who looked like me. But Sarah wasn't done. Not even close. The next phase of her campaign was more personal. Someone, and we all knew who, had gone through the town's newspaper archives and found the article about my parents' accident. Suddenly, copies of that old, painful story were everywhere. In my locker, taped to my desk, slipped into my textbooks. The headlines were cruel enough. Local couple dies in drunk driving accident. But someone had added handwritten notes in the margins. Like mother, like daughter, and bad blood runs in families. And maybe she should join them. I remember the day I found one of those articles on my desk in calculus class. My hands shook so badly I couldn't hold my pencil. Mrs. Davidson, the teacher, saw me crying and asked if I needed to go to the nurse. But when I tried to show her the article, it had mysteriously disappeared. Sarah, sitting 3 seats behind me, gave me that same sweet smile that had become her signature. The lies about my parents, that they were drunk, that they were criminals, that I was following in their footsteps, hurt worse than anything she had done to me personally. My parents had been good people. My father was a mechanic who fixed cars for half price when people couldn't afford full payment. My mother volunteered at the church and made sure elderly neighbors had groceries during winter storms. They died because a drunk driver ran a red light and hit their car while they were coming home from my 3rd birthday party. But in Sarah's version of the story, they were the drunk drivers. They were the criminals. They were the ones who deserved what they got. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree," she said to me one day after American history class. "I heard your daddy used to beat your mama. And your mama was probably turning tricks to pay the bills. No wonder you turned out so messed up." I ran. I ran from the classroom, from the school, from everything, and I didn't stop until I reached the old oak tree by Miller's Creek, 2 miles from campus. That's where my grandmother found me 3 hours later, when the school called to report that I hadn't been in my afternoon classes. "They're saying terrible things about Mama and Daddy," I sobbed into her shoulder. "They're saying things that aren't true, and everyone believes them, and I don't know how to make it stop." My grandmother held me while I cried, and when I was finally empty of tears, she pulled back and looked into my eyes with an intensity I'd never seen before. "Maya, listen to me carefully. There are going to be times in your life when people try to rewrite your story. They'll try to make you believe that you are what they say you are instead of who you know you are. But you have a choice. You can let their lies define you, or you can use their lies to fuel the fire that makes you stronger." "But how?" I whispered. "How do I keep going when everyone hates me?" "You keep going because quitting is exactly what they want you to do. You keep going because your parents didn't sacrifice their lives for you to give up on yours. And you keep going because somewhere out there is a little girl who's going to need the doctor you're going to become. And she's counting on you to survive this, even if she doesn't know it yet." That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I decided that I wasn't going to just survive high school. I was going to excel so dramatically that no one would ever be able to question my worth again. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While other students were at parties or football games, I was in the library. While they were sleeping in on weekends, I was doing extra credit projects. While they were complaining about homework, I was reading medical journals that I could barely understand, but was determined to master. My grades, which had always been good, became perfect. Not just A's, but the highest A's in every class. I started winning academic competitions at the state level. I began taking college courses through a dual enrollment program, driving 40 minutes each way to the community college, because I had exhausted every advanced course my high school offered. But the more I succeeded, the angrier Sarah became. "You think you're so smart. She hissed at me after the announcement that I had received a full scholarship to pre-med at Northwestern University. You think you're better than all of us, but you'll never escape what you are. You'll never escape where you came from. And someday, when you're back here working at the Walmart because you couldn't handle the real world, I'll be here to remind you that I was right about you all along. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years, and what I saw surprised me. Behind all that anger and cruelty, I saw fear. Sarah Richardson, the golden girl who had everything handed to her, was terrified that someone like me could rise above someone like her. She was terrified that merit might matter more than money, that character might count more than connections, that the world might not be as fixed in her favor as she had always believed. You're right about one thing, Sarah, I said quietly. I will never escape where I came from. But that's not a weakness. It's my strength. And someday, when you need someone to save what matters most to you, you're going to be very grateful that people like me exist. I graduated valedictorian. Sarah graduated somewhere in the middle of our class of 127 students. At the graduation ceremony, while she was posing for pictures with her family's expensive camera, I was shaking hands with the dean of Northwestern's medical school, who had driven down specifically to meet me. As I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I caught Sarah's eye one last time. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was staring at me with something that might have been recognition, the dawning realization that she had been wrong about who would fade away and who would rise. But I had no idea that our story was far from over. I had no idea that 15 years later, fate would bring us together in a way that neither of us could have imagined, in a moment when the lessons of forgiveness and redemption would be tested in ways that would change both of our lives forever. Northwestern University was like stepping into another universe. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence over pedigree, who measured success by achievement rather than ancestry. I wasn't the scholarship kid or the poor girl or the only black face in the room. I was just Maya, pre-med student, future doctor. But the scars from Millfield didn't heal overnight. During my first semester, I sat in the back of every classroom, spoke only when directly asked a question, and ate lunch alone while reading textbooks. My roommate, Jennifer, was a bubbly girl from Connecticut who couldn't understand why I was so guarded. "You know you're allowed to have fun, right?" she said one October evening as I sat at my desk, working through organic chemistry problems for the third time. "This is fun for me," I replied, not looking up from my molecular structures. "Maya, when's the last time you went to a party? Or a movie? Or just hung out with friends?" I paused, my pencil hovering over a particularly complex reaction mechanism. "I don't really do friends." "Why not?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. How could I explain that friendship felt like a luxury I couldn't afford? How could I tell her that every time I thought about opening up to someone, I heard Sarah's voice reminding me that people like me didn't belong in places like this? "People leave," I said finally. "Or they hurt you. Books don't do either." Jennifer sat down on her bed across from me, her expression serious for the first time since I'd known her. "Maya, I don't know what happened to you before you came here, but whoever hurt you, they're not here. They can't reach you anymore unless you let them." That night, I lay awake thinking about what she'd said. Was I still letting Sarah Richardson control my life, even from 600 miles away? Was I so afraid of being rejected that I was rejecting everyone first? The next day, I did something that terrified me. I raised my hand in biochemistry class to answer a question, not because I'd been called on, but because I wanted to participate. The professor, Dr. Martinez, smiled when I gave the correct answer and said, "Excellent insight, Maya. That's exactly the kind of thinking that will make you a great physician someday." A great physician. The words felt like a benediction. Slowly, carefully, I began to let people in. I joined study groups. I accepted invitations to grab coffee between classes. I even went to a few parties, though I usually left early to get back to my books. But the most important relationship I formed was with Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the head of pediatric neurosurgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I met Dr. Chen during my junior year, when I was volunteering in the children's ward. I had always been drawn to pediatrics. Something about working with children felt like a calling. But it was watching Dr. Chen operate that made me realize my true passion. She was performing a craniotomy on a 6-year-old boy who had fallen from a tree and developed a subdural hematoma. I was only supposed to observe from the gallery, but something about the precision of her movements, the way she navigated the delicate structures of the brain with complete confidence, mesmerized me. After the surgery, she found me still standing at the observation window. "First time watching a craniotomy?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. It was incredible." She studied me for a moment, taking in my scrubs, my student ID badge, the notebook clutched in my hands where I'd been frantically scribbling notes. "What's your name?" "Maya Johnson. I'm a pre-med junior." "What did you think of the approach I used for the bone flap?" The question caught me off guard. Most attendings didn't bother quizzing students, especially not undergrads. But I could hear the genuine curiosity in her voice. "You used a larger craniotomy than I expected," I said carefully. "Based on the imaging, it seemed like you could have gotten away with a smaller opening." "And why do you think I didn't?" I thought about it, replaying the surgery in my mind. Because it wasn't just about accessing the hematoma. You were thinking about potential complications, about giving yourself room to work if the bleeding was worse than expected, about minimizing the risk of having to go back in for a second operation. Dr. Chen smiled, a real smile, not the polite one that doctors usually gave to students. "Exactly. You see the forest, not just the trees. That's rare, especially in someone your age." She paused. "Have you ever considered neurosurgery?" "I've thought about it," I admitted. "But isn't it... the training is so long and it's so competitive." "Maya, can I give you some advice? Don't let other people's limitations become your own. If you want something, if you have the talent and the drive, then go after it. The worst thing that can happen is failure, and you strike me as someone who survived worse things than failure." She was right, of course. I had survived worse things than failure. I had survived Sarah Richardson. From that day forward, Dr. Chen became my mentor, my champion, and eventually, something like a second mother. She guided me through medical school applications, helped me prepare for the MCAT, and wrote recommendation letters that opened doors I never would have thought to knock on. Medical school at Johns Hopkins was brutal, but it was a good kind of brutal. Every 18-hour day, every failed exam that I had to retake, every time I fell asleep over my anatomy books, it all felt like progress towards something meaningful. I wasn't just studying to prove Sarah wrong anymore. I was studying because I had found my purpose. During my surgery rotations, I discovered that I had steady hands and a calm demeanor under pressure. During my pediatrics rotations, I learned that I could connect with children in a way that put them at ease, even in the scariest moments of their lives. And during my neurosurgery elective, I knew with absolute certainty that I had found my calling. The human brain was the most complex structure in the known universe, and I was going to dedicate my life to fixing it when it broke. Residency was 5 years of organized chaos. I worked 100-hour weeks, slept in hospital call rooms more often than my own bed, and made decisions that determined whether children lived or died. There were moments when the pressure nearly broke me, nights when I sat in hospital bathrooms crying because I'd lost a patient, mornings when I questioned whether I was smart enough or strong enough to do this job. But every time I doubted myself, I thought about my grandmother's words. Strength is about feeling that pain and choosing to keep going anyway. And I thought about all the children who would need me to keep going, even when it was hard. I finished my residency at the top of my class and was offered a fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. By the time I was 32, I was Dr. Maya Johnson, board-certified pediatric neurosurgeon, with a reputation for taking on the cases that other surgeons considered too risky. I had become everything Sarah Richardson said I would never be. I had escaped the limitations she tried to place on me. I was saving lives, making a difference, proving every single day that her cruel predictions had been wrong. I thought I had left Millfield and everyone in it far behind me. I thought my story with Sarah Richardson was over, a chapter closed and filed away in the past where it belonged. I had no idea that the most important chapter was still to come. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, 15 years after I'd graduated from Millfield High. I was in my office at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, reviewing surgical notes from a complex tumor resection I'd performed that morning, when my phone rang. "Dr. Johnson? This is Dr. Patricia Reeves from Millfield General Hospital." Millfield. The name hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't been back to my hometown since my grandmother's funeral 3 years earlier, and I had hoped never to return. "Yes, Dr. Reeves. How can I help you?" "We have a 7-year-old patient with a traumatic brain injury, subdural hematoma with significant midline shift. She needs immediate surgical intervention, but I have to be honest with you. This is beyond my capabilities. The nearest pediatric neurosurgeon is 4 hours away in Memphis, and she doesn't have 4 hours." I closed my eyes, already knowing what she was going to ask. "I know this is highly irregular, but I've been following your work. Your reputation precedes you, Dr. Johnson. You're one of the best pediatric neurosurgeons in the country, and you're the only one close enough to save this little girl's life. Would you consider coming here? Tonight?" Every instinct I had screamed at me to say no. Millfield was the place of my nightmares, the town that had tried to destroy me before I had the chance to become who I was meant to be. Going back there felt like walking voluntarily into a trap. But then, Dr. Reeves continued, and her words changed everything. "The patient's name is Emma Richardson. She's the daughter of Sarah Richardson. I believe you two went to school together." The irony was so profound it almost felt scripted. Sarah Richardson's daughter, the woman who had spent 3 years of her life trying to convince me that I was worthless, that I would never amount to anything, that people like me didn't become doctors. Her child was dying, and I was the only person who could save her. "Dr. Johnson, are you still there?" "Yes," I said quietly. "Tell me about the injury." "Motor vehicle accident. The family was driving back from a soccer tournament when they hit a patch of ice. The car rolled twice. Emma was ejected through the rear window despite her seatbelt. The buckle mechanism failed. She's been unconscious since the paramedics found her. CT shows a large subdural hematoma with 8 millimeters of midline shift. Her pupils are becoming sluggish, and her Glasgow coma scale is dropping. Every detail painted a picture of a child in crisis, a brain swelling against the rigid confines of the skull, pressure building to levels that would soon cause irreversible damage. This wasn't about Sarah Richardson anymore. This was about a 7-year-old girl who needed me to do my job. "I'll be there in 3 hours," I said. "Keep her stable, monitor her neurosigns every 15 minutes, and prepare your OR. And Dr. Reeves, make sure your blood bank is ready. We're going to need it." The drive to Millfield was the longest 3 hours of my life. As I navigated the familiar country roads in the darkness, memories flooded back with startling clarity. The school bus routes, the corner where Tommy Martinez had his first car accident, the creek where Jennifer Walsh had her graduation party, the oak tree where my grandmother had found me crying that day. Sarah had attacked my parents' memory, but mostly, I thought about the little girl who was fighting for her life in a small-town hospital, waiting for me to arrive. I thought about her mother, the woman who had once told me I would never become a doctor, who was now praying that a doctor, any doctor, could save her child. I thought about forgiveness and revenge, and the strange ways that fate brings our past and present together in moments that define who we really are. When I pulled into the parking lot of Millfield General Hospital at 11:47 p.m., I saw a crowd of people huddled near the emergency entrance. Even in the dim light of the parking lot lamps, I recognized some of the faces. Former classmates, their parents, people who had watched Sarah torment me and done nothing to stop it. But as I walked toward the hospital entrance, carrying my surgical bag and wearing my scrubs from Philadelphia, something extraordinary happened. The crowd parted, not with hostility or suspicion, but with something that looked almost like reverence. "That's her," I heard someone whisper. "That's Dr. Johnson. She's come to save Emma." Inside the hospital, chaos reigned. Family members filled the waiting room, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. Medical staff moved with the urgent efficiency of people dealing with a crisis beyond their usual capabilities. And there, sitting in a plastic chair with her face buried in her hands, was Sarah Richardson. She looked older, of course. The golden hair was streaked with gray, and lines of worry had etched themselves around her eyes. She was still beautiful in that effortless way that some people are born with, but the cruelty that had once defined her features was gone, replaced by the raw terror of a mother watching her child die. When she looked up and saw me, her face went through a series of emotions so rapid I could barely track them. Surprise, recognition, shame, hope, fear, and finally, something that might have been gratitude. "Maya," she whispered, standing up on unsteady legs. "You came." "I'm here for Emma," I said simply. "Where is she?" Emma Richardson was small for her age, with dark hair spread across the hospital pillow like spilled ink. Machines surrounded her bed, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath, every millimeter of intracranial pressure. Her face was peaceful, almost angelic, but the numbers on the monitors told a different story. Her brain was dying, one neuron at a time. "Dr. Johnson?" A young resident approached me nervously. "I'm Dr. Williams. Thank you so much for coming. Her latest vitals show—" "I can see them," I interrupted, studying the monitors with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 15 years reading these particular tea leaves. "Her ICP is climbing. Pupils are 3 millimeters and sluggish bilaterally. How long since the accident?" 4 hours and 17 minutes. 4 hours. In neurosurgery, time isn't just money, it's brain cells. It's the difference between a child who recovers completely and one who spends the rest of her life in a wheelchair. It's the difference between a future and a tragedy. "Prep her for surgery," I said. "Standard craniotomy setup, but I want extra suction ready and at least 6 units of blood on standby. This is going to be complicated." As the surgical team prepared Emma for transport to the operating room, I stepped outside to speak with her family. Sarah was still in the waiting room, surrounded by people I recognized from my past. Her husband, a man I didn't know who looked kind and worried. Her parents, the same people who had once looked at me like I was something unpleasant they'd found on their shoes. And scattered throughout the room, former classmates who had watched Sarah torment me and never said a word. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I need to explain what we're dealing with." She looked up at me with eyes red from crying. "Is she going to be okay?" The question every parent asks, the one that doctors are never supposed to answer with false hope. But looking at this woman, this person who had once been my greatest enemy, I saw only a mother desperate for any reason to believe her child would survive. "Emma has a severe brain injury," I said, choosing my words carefully. "There's bleeding inside her skull that's putting pressure on her brain. I need to operate immediately to relieve that pressure and stop the bleeding. It's a complex surgery and there are risks." "What kind of risks?" her husband asked. "Stroke, permanent neurological damage, paralysis, memory loss. And yes, there's a possibility that she might not survive the surgery." Sarah made a sound that was half sob, half moan. "But you're going to try? You're going to do everything you can?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I never thought I'd see in Sarah Richardson's eyes: vulnerability. Complete, helpless vulnerability. "I'm going to do everything I can," I promised. "Emma is lucky to have me here tonight. This is what I do, Sarah. This is what I've spent my entire career preparing for." "Maya," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but please save my baby. She's everything to me. She's my whole world." For a moment, I was 14 again, standing in the hallway while Sarah told me I would never amount to anything. I was 18 again, listening to her predict that I would fail and come crawling back to Millfield. I was every age I'd ever been when her words had cut me down and made me feel small. But then I looked at her daughter's medical chart, and I remembered why I was really here. "I'll see you after the surgery," I said. The operating room at Millfield General was smaller than what I was used to, with older equipment and a surgical team that had never assisted on a pediatric craniotomy. But they were good people doing their best work, and sometimes that's all you have. "Okay, everyone," I said, as we positioned Emma on the operating table. "I know this isn't your usual case, but I need you to trust me and follow my lead. This little girl is depending on all of us to work together perfectly. Any questions?" There were none. We began. Opening a child's skull is always sobering, even after hundreds of surgeries. The bone is so thin, the structure so delicate, the margin for error so slim. But as I worked, making the careful incisions that would give me access to Emma's injured brain, I felt the familiar calm that comes with absolute focus. The hematoma was larger than the scans had indicated, a dark pool of blood that had been pressing against Emma's brain for over 4 hours. But as I carefully evacuated the clot, I could see healthy pink brain tissue underneath, tissue that would recover if I could just relieve the pressure in time. "Suction," I said, and the scrub nurse anticipated my needs perfectly. "ICP is dropping," the anesthesiologist reported, "down to 18. Good, but not good enough yet." As I worked deeper, identifying the source of the bleeding and carefully cauterizing each damaged vessel, I found myself thinking about the chain of events that had brought me to this moment. Every cruel word Sarah had spoken. Every night I'd cried myself to sleep. Every hour I'd spent studying when other kids were playing. Every sacrifice my grandmother had made. Every patient I'd saved during my training. All of it had led to this: a little girl's life hanging in the balance, and me as the only person with the skills to tip that balance toward hope. "There," I said, as I sealed the last bleeding vessel. "That should do it. How are her vitals?" "ICP down to 12 and falling, heart rate stable, blood pressure coming up." I allowed myself one moment of relief before beginning the meticulous process of closing. Every suture had to be perfect, every layer of tissue carefully aligned. Emma's recovery would depend not just on stopping the bleeding, but on giving her brain the best possible environment to heal. "Beautiful work, Dr. Johnson," whispered Dr. Reeves, who had been observing from the gallery. "I've never seen anything like it." 2 hours and 43 minutes after we'd begun, I placed the final suture and stepped back from the table. Emma Richardson, the daughter of my former tormentor, was alive, stable, and had every reason to make a full recovery. "Let's get her to recovery," I said. "Monitor her neurochecks every 15 minutes for the first 4 hours, then every 30 minutes after that. Call me immediately if there's any change." As the surgical team wheeled Emma toward recovery, I stood alone in the empty operating room, still wearing my blood-stained scrubs, and tried to process what had just happened. I had saved the life of Sarah Richardson's child. The woman who had spent years trying to destroy my dreams of becoming a doctor was about to owe her daughter's life to the girl she had once called worthless. But as I walked toward the waiting room to deliver the news, I realized something that surprised me. I felt no satisfaction in the irony. No sense of vindication or revenge. What I felt was simply the quiet satisfaction of having done my job, of having used my skills to save a child's life. The waiting room fell silent when I appeared in the doorway. 37 pairs of eyes turned toward me, searching my face for any clue about Emma's fate. Sarah stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair, her hand pressed to her mouth as if she could hold in the words she was afraid to hear. "The surgery was successful," I said, and the collective exhale of relief was audible. "Emma is stable and recovering. The pressure on her brain has been relieved, and all indications suggest she'll make a full recovery." Sarah collapsed back into her chair, sobbing with relief. Her husband embraced her, tears streaming down his own face. Around the room, people hugged each other, whispered prayers of thanksgiving, and wiped away tears they didn't know they'd been holding back. But I wasn't done. However, I continued, and the room quieted again. "She'll need careful monitoring for the next 48 hours. Brain injuries can be unpredictable, and children's brains, while more resilient than adults, still need time to heal. I'll be staying in town until I'm confident she's completely out of danger." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, standing up again on shaky legs. "Maya, I don't know how to—" "You don't need to say anything," I replied. "I didn't do this for you, Sarah. I did it for Emma. She's an innocent child who deserved every chance at life that I could give her." But Sarah shook her head, tears still streaming down her face. "No, I do need to say something. I need to say something I should have said 23 years ago." She looked around the room, at all the faces from our shared past, and when she spoke again, her voice was strong and clear. "I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. Maya Johnson is one of the finest people I've ever known, and tonight she proved something I was too stupid and cruel to see when we were kids. She is exactly the kind of person this world needs more of. She is exactly the kind of person who should be a doctor. And Emma is alive tonight because Maya chose to become everything I once told her she could never be." The silence in the room was profound. These were people who had watched Sarah torment me for years, who had stood by and done nothing while she tried to destroy my spirit. Now they were hearing her publicly acknowledge what they had all been too cowardly to say at the time. That she had been wrong, and I had been worthy of their respect all along. "I'm sorry, Maya," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry for every cruel word, every humiliation, every moment of pain I caused you. You didn't deserve any of it. You were just a girl trying to learn and grow and become something better. And I tried to stop you because I was afraid that if you succeeded, it would mean that all the advantages I'd been given didn't matter as much as I thought they did." I looked at this woman, this person who had once been the villain of my story, and saw something I'd never expected to see. Genuine remorse. Not the fake apology of someone trying to save face, but the deep, painful recognition of someone who finally understood the magnitude of what she had done. "Sarah," I said quietly, "we were children. Hurt children make hurt children. I forgave you a long time ago, not because you deserved it, but because carrying that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you." She nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. Will you let me know how she's doing? Emma, I mean, over the next few days?" "Of course. I'll check on her every few hours until I'm ready to transfer her care back to Dr. Reeves." As I turned to leave, Sarah called my name one more time. "Maya." My grandmother always used to say that we never know how our stories will end. She said that the people we think are our enemies might turn out to be our angels, and the challenges we think will destroy us might be exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be. She paused, looking at me with something that might have been wonder. "I think she would have said that you were always meant to be here tonight. That everything that happened between us, all the pain and the struggle and the growth, it was all leading to this moment when Emma would need you to be exactly who you are." I stood there for a long moment, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me back to this place, to this moment, to this woman who had once tried to convince me I was nothing. Maybe she was right, I said finally. Maybe our stories are bigger than we think they are. Maybe the girl who survived your cruelty and the woman who learned to forgive it were both necessary for Emma to be alive tomorrow morning. As I walked out of Millfield General Hospital into the cool October night, I thought about my grandmother, who had died believing that I would do great things in this world. I thought about Dr. Chen, who had seen potential in a scared undergraduate and nurtured it into expertise. I thought about all the children I had saved over the years, all the families I had helped heal, but mostly, I thought about Emma Richardson, sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, her brain healing, her future restored. Tomorrow she would wake up and hug her mother and probably never know that the surgeon who saved her life was once that same mother's favorite target for cruelty. And that was exactly how it should be. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with vindication. Some end with the satisfaction of proving your enemies wrong. But the best stories, the ones that change both the teller and the listener, end with grace. They end with the recognition that our pain can become our purpose, that our wounds can become our wisdom, and that sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating our enemies, but saving the people they love most. My name is Dr. Maya Johnson. I am a pediatric neurosurgeon, a grandmother's legacy, and proof that the girl they said would never amount to anything can grow up to hold life and death in her steady hands. And tonight, in a small town that once tried to destroy me, I chose healing over hatred, hope over revenge, and love over all the reasons not to love. That, I think, is what my grandmother would have called doing great things in this world. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Heartland Confessions. Dr. Maya Johnson's story reminds us that our greatest challenges often prepare us for our most important moments, that forgiveness is not about the people who hurt us, but about the people we choose to become, and that sometimes our former enemies' children become the reason we discover the true depth of our own grace. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that their pain has purpose, their struggles have meaning, and their dreams are worth fighting for, no matter who tries to tell them otherwise. Remember, you never know how your story will end, but you always get to choose how you write the next chapter. Until next time, this is Heartland Confessions, where every story has the power to change a life.